Some supervillains are just too lame to ever be dangerous, right? Wrong. All they need is a little boost. Supervillains are a wild bunch. With the necessity to keep coming up with new foes for the heroes to beat up, more baddies are created all the time, but not all of them are created equal. Some become pop culture icons and rogues gallery mainstays, and others end up being considered complete jokes. Maybe they have a silly name or a dumb costume, unimpressive powers, or maybe they get beaten up too easily every time they show up. But even the lamest of supervillains sometimes pull themselves together or get a power boost that makes them far, far more dangerous than usual. It's hard to believe in a post-Netflix Jessica Jones world, but there used to be a time when Zebediah Killgrave, also known as the Purple Man, was little more than a minor annoyance. Despite his ability to completely dominate people with nothing but verbal commands, he wasn't all that creative with it and settled for committing simple bank robberies only to get socked in the jaw by Daredevil every once in a while. But then he started to realize just how strong his mind control powers actually were. He then commanded the Fortune 500 company CEO Maxwell Glenn, father of Matt Murdock's girlfriend Heather, to commit many crimes and finance all of his anti-Daredevil efforts. As a result, Heather broke up with Daredevil, Maxwell committed suicide, and Killgrave had Daredevil duke it out with 4 of his foes at once, namely the Gladiator, the Jester, Mr. Hyde, and Cobra. Not a bad showing for a man who sounds like a rejected first draft of Grimace. And then there's Alias, the comic book that later got adapted into the successful Netflix series Jessica Jones, which truly cemented him as a dangerous and deranged individual who is unafraid of using his powers in the grossest ways possible. Ever since then, he has potentially become one of the scariest mind-manipulating characters in all of comic book history. While Hammerhead is definitely a rogues gallery mainstay for Spider-Man and one of the more striking characters in Marvel's criminal underworld, he has never been a major contender in terms of raw power. After all, his superpower used to literally just be having a metal skull. That's not to say he wasn't a dangerous gangster, but it's a far cry from some of the more impressive villains the Webslinger has fought in his career. But good old Hammerhead is not too proud to accept that upgrade. After getting shot by adamantium bullets and being at death's door, Mr. Negative offered Hammerhead to let his surgeon, Dr. Trauma, transfer his brain into an adamantium skeleton in exchange for working for him. Hammerhead agreed and took on the duties as a leader of low-life gangs that more or less served as Mr. Negative's private army. Essentially having become a mini version of Rhino, Hammerhead then managed to beat the ever-living tar out of Spidey in the next encounter, and even dislocated the poor superhero's jaw in the tussle. Spidey took him down in a rematch, of course, but that encounter was a real shock to his system. And from that point on, Hammerhead was no longer simply just a flat-top joke. William Derrick Hand was first introduced in 1964 as a petty criminal inventor, calling himself the Black Hand simply because he was the black sheep of his family. While his invention, which could absorb and redirect Green Lantern energy, was impressive, he never really did all that much with it and was a bit of a lame foe. Over time, however, Hand got increasingly gross. After being reinvented as a creepy man who was obsessed with death ever since he was born, he acquired a black light weapon from a being known as Atrocitus and got into a tussle with the Green Lantern. And then he went and slept off his defeat in an occupied grave just for a few extra Icky points. After killing his family and then committing suicide, he then became the tether for a being called Necron, who used Hand to reclaim all the souls of anyone who had ever come back from the dead in the DC universe. This led to the Blackest Night storyline, where all of DC's currently deceased characters returned as zombified, emotion-eating Black Lanterns. Yeah, suffice it to say, this thing easily takes the cake as one of the craziest and creepiest major events to ever happen in the DC universe. In Spider-Man's colossal rogues gallery, you can find many silly faces that get treated like complete jokes. Such is the fate of poor old Jonathan Owen, better known as the Spot. But let's be real, despite his ability to teleport using miniature black holes, the dude is kind of asking for it. Dressing up like the long-lost 102nd Dalmatian and naming himself after a book series for preschoolers doesn't exactly inspire terror in the hearts of men. Well, that is except for that one time when he suddenly got really scary. After getting stuck in his black hole dimension, Jonathan lost both his mind and his ability to speak, only being driven to return after his son Wyatt was hit in a drive-by shooting carried out by a mobster named Dmitry Ivankov. Spot, who was now a quiet stalker sending Treasure Island-style black spot warnings to his target, relentlessly pursued Dmitry and was only barely stopped by Spider-Man, but not before scaring Ivankov so badly that he went insane with paranoia, believing that Spot would, and could, get to him from anywhere at any time. Sadly, this more frightening Spot didn't stick, and he soon returned to being the goofy, ineffective villain that people knew. But for a moment there, we got a glimpse of just how terrifying he could potentially be. Oh, and the story gave us this panel, which quite frankly deserves to be framed and displayed in an art museum. This is just absolutely beautiful. Many villains have tried being an evil version of Batman, but few of them have failed quite as hilariously as Killer Moth. Widely mocked for his weird codename, garish costume, and frankly embarrassing track record as a supervillain, Killer Moth is known as one of the biggest jokes amongst all bad rogues. But hey, that's nothing that a little deal with the devil can't fix. In the DC comic storyline Underworld Unleashed, the devil Neron offered practically every supervillain under the sun anything they wanted in exchange for their souls, all at once. And while many villains took the deal and received big power boosts, Killer Moth's case is definitely one of the more unique ones. Upon taking the deal, he went from being a dude in striped tights and a dumb bug helmet to a man-eating, acid-spitting moth monster named Charaxes. And in this form, he terrorized Gotham for a good decade before finally being ripped in half by Superboy Prime. But at least he got to live up to his name for a while. From one criminal Batman to another, Thomas Blake, better known as Catman, is somewhat unique on this list in that he actually started out as a fairly competent foil to the Cape Crusader. But due to his redundant cat theme and basically just ripping off Batman at every turn, he gradually got more and more lame, ultimately becoming a washed up, out of shape loser of a mercenary who most heroes would be embarrassed to have to fight. And then Gail Simone got her hands on him. Tired of being seen as a loser, Blake then moved to Africa to live with a lion pride, of which he ended up becoming the main, that is to say the leader of that pride. He then resurfaced as a tough-as-nails raw zebra-eating badass capable of going toe-to-toe with Batman in a straight fight and joined the Secret Six, where he remained a main character for the whole book's run. And if you don't believe that he was a badass by now, try asking those guys that kidnapped his son. Oh wait, you can't. They're all very, very dead. Given his horror theme and overall demonic nature, Ghost Rider is best known for fighting various devils, angels, and other supernatural threats. But that doesn't mean he hasn't faced the occasional costume criminal, one of the most bizarre and ineffective being the Orb. Well, the first one anyway. Drake Shannon was little more than a thug wearing an eyeball helmet with such lofty goals as taking over a motorcycle show, only to get his butt handed to him by Ghost Rider and Spider-Man. His successor, however, is a different story. Actually having a genuine giant eyeball for a head, this unnamed orb was a freak show attraction before becoming a mercenary, and was somewhat more competent, if still not all that much of a threat. But that changed when he stole and merged with Uatu the Watcher's left eye during the original Sin storyline in Marvel Comics. This not only enhanced his superhuman physique, but drove him to observe major events like the Watcher. Except he also started nudging people to perform the darkest, most evil and violent acts they were capable of, just to instigate more events that he could witness. Yikes. As Catman just proved, becoming a more formidable villain is not always a matter of getting yourself a fancy power boost. Sometimes all you need is to think a little more clearly. Roland Desmond was stuck caring for his brother Mark after his strength-enhancing Blockbuster serum turned him into a practically mindless brute, and he started using his brother's simple mindset to manipulate him into committing crimes. After facing Batman on a few occasions, Mark then met his end battling Brimstone when he was recruited into the Suicide Squad. Later, Roland underwent experimental hormone treatment to combat a terrible illness and, much like his brother, became a powerful but dim-witted brute called Blockbuster. Until Neron offered him a deal too. Asking to no longer be stupid, Roland was granted genius intellect and quickly went from being just a simple-minded slab of muscle to a master planner and crime boss of Bloodhaven. This led to him basically becoming Nightwing's archenemy after discovering his identity as Dick Grayson and killing everyone in his apartment building. So while Blockbuster remains a relatively small fish in the supervillain community, this intelligence boost made him a hell of a lot more dangerous than he used to be. For Arthur Parks, who would later be known as the Living Laser, the road to being taken seriously as a supervillain was long and hard. After all, I got dumped by my girlfriend and I'm really mad about it is a pretty lousy supervillain origin story. But that's what happened. Arthur got so pissy about his girlfriend leaving him that he made some wrist-mounted laser blades, called himself the Living Laser, and got his ass handed to him by the Avengers when he got mad about Wasp rejecting him too. The poor guy quickly developed the nickname Living Loser in the superhuman community as a result. It wasn't until a fight with Iron Man where Arthur got caught in a massive explosion that turned him into an actual living laser that he became a villain worth mentioning at all. Now having a body made entirely of light particles, Arthur could shoot powerful lasers, make complicated holograms, and was nearly untouchable, thus turning him into a severely mentally unstable and very powerful Iron Man foe. And finally, there's Doc Seismic. What? Who said it would only be Marvel and DC? Since the Invincible series takes such delight in playing around with superhero tropes and so few of Earth's villains actually pose much of a threat to the absurdly powerful Mark, it's really no surprise that some villains come across as pretty lame. Doc Seismic was specifically introduced as an example of an old-school style of supervillain who couldn't quite keep up with the times. That's not to say that creating earthquakes with his gauntlets made him a pansy or anything, but he was just no match for Mark and Adam Eve in his first outing. After ending up in a strange underground realm, he managed to become the leader of some pretty impressive monsters and had them kidnap practically all of Image Comics' superheroes in one fell swoop, planning to kill them all. When that plan just barely failed, a tribe of lava men then turned him into their king, after which he became a much more formidable physical threat. So what do you think? What are some common joke villains that you think could get really badass if they could just land a writer who cared? Or did I forget some that already have? Post about them in the comments. I love hearing people's thoughts about this stuff.